Hello everybody, this is Train King James here. It has been a long time since I've done a video on my channel. I apologize. I went on vacation in July, and then afterwards I was a little tired, so I didn't really want to work on videos, so I took time off, and then I got sick, so I couldn't really talk. So we're back with the Season 9 tier list. I promise I'm not trying to become a tier list channel. It's just, this is one of the few videos I can consistently make. Episode 2, or excuse me, the second part of the recent episode, Duke's Duke, is on its way. I just have to work on a few things. It is coming. It should be out by the end of the month at the absolute latest. Now, let's get into Season 9, which is, now we're starting to get into some of the more interesting seasons to talk about, because these aren't like the most popular seasons. People have all sorts of opinions. And coming out of Season 9, I was overall kind of disappointed. And I remembered Season 9 a lot more fondly than it was presented here, so we'll see how I feel. There are some episodes, though, that I'm going to be pretty interested to rank, but I feel like my opinions on this season are a little more either good or really bad, not so much in the middle, so we'll see what happens. First episode this season, Percy in the oil painting. This is one of the examples of an episode that I came back to, and I actually was really pleased with this episode. It is going to go in S tier. I really enjoyed this one. I like the story. I like the idea that Percy's the spirit of Sodor. It doesn't try to follow the same tacky route of making Thomas the star. I really like that, and I love the moment at Knapford Station where the artist just kind of insults Sodor, and it annoys Percy, and it annoys Gordon, and it kind of almost feels like Gordon wants to say something, but he actually lets Percy have this one. And I just love the moment of tension when Percy wishes Steve, and it knocks the beret off the artist, and everyone is scared, and Percy's nervous, and I don't know, it's just such a fun episode. And I like how the artist is clearly the one at fault. There's no morally gray thing Percy does. Like, Percy's just himself, and this is a really well-written episode for his character. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in S tier. Really strong start to the season. However, the next episode, Thomas and the Rainbow, I'm going to put it in C tier. And it's just kind of a blah episode. Actually, we're going to move it up to 9. I do like the montage of the engines trying to get help to help Thomas. And I do kind of like that the idea that, like, oh, like the real gold at the end of the rainbow is our friends, and that kind of thing. So I do kind of like that. It's a little corny, but this episode is mostly blah. But there are some good moments in it, so I am going to give it that little bump up. I talked about this in Season 8, and we're going to talk about it here. I am not a huge fan of these. Thomas has a boring job to do, and he doesn't want to do it. Now, this is probably one of the better ones, but this goes in C tier. It just isn't a really great episode. Thomas's milkshake muddle. I should clarify in the title, obviously. It's just kind of that same kind of, I have a boring job. I will say the solution to this episode is actually kind of clever, because a lot of the times in these episodes, Thomas usually wastes something, or they have to go get a whole other thing, but I like the idea that, like, no, the spoiled milk just becomes butter, which is kind of smart, actually. I mean, I guess they technically wasted whatever load of butter Thomas would pick up, but, you know, it's actually kind of a smart use of resources. But yeah, nothing special about this episode. Mighty Mac is a solid episode. I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it's a nice introduction to these two characters. I like that this episode is mostly these two characters interacting off of each other. There's no other engine that really significantly interacts with them. We do get Thomas a little bit at the beginning, but that's it. But I do like this. Obviously, this is our return of the narrow gauge characters in the season, and even then they still haven't appeared yet. Which, as we go through the season, that's kind of going to be a good thing. But we'll get to it when we get to it. Molly Special. I think this is an A tier episode. I really like Molly. I know she's not one of the most popular characters, because this is really the only episode she gets featured. But I like how she's like, she has almost like crippling anxiety. That's such an interesting character trait. Like, she is so anxious and has such low self-esteem that the idea of someone telling her that, like, oh, you know, it's lame that you're pulling empty cars. Like, Emily says that, and that's enough to just set her off, and that's enough to upset her. And you know, I kind of like that Thomas's idea fails. Like, I think it's it's kind of an interesting lesson that this episode teaches. It's interesting to teach this to kids. You know, it's not about, like, the shiny exterior or trying to look impressive. It's about being true to yourself and being you and not trying to impress anybody, just trying to do what you do best. It's kind of a mature thing to talk about, and I kind of like that this season had some episodes that were trying to teach interesting lessons, and this is another one. If you watch Thomas and Friends, this episode rightfully belongs in S tier. And when I say that this is not just the best Gordon episode of this season, this might be the best Gordon episode in the franchise. It may legitimately be one of his best, because I love this episode. Everyone talks about it. It's the one episode of the hit era everyone agrees is good. But I'll go even further. This is a great episode in the show in general, because this is really a great example of how to take advantage of this new era. The episode has some dynamic angles, some interesting crashes, obviously with Gordon hitting the tankers, which, that's insane to me, that they had an express train with passengers aboard collide into trucks. Now, we see Gordon derail, the coach is dumped, but that's a crazy crash to see happen in this era of the show when they're trying to be a little bit safer, but nope, that's what happens. I also think it's interesting, you know, that in a classic series, the way this story would end is Gordon hits the tankers and he learns his lesson and he rides off in the sunset. No, we get this extra part of the episode, and this whole episode, again, like Molly's episode teaching a really interesting lesson, is about respect, and it's a very complicated thing to talk about, because yes, people deserve respect, but respect has to be earned, right? And the episode begins with Gordon demanding it, and then he earns it at the end when the others realize just how much he means to them. No one is really a good person in this episode, because the others are making fun of Gordon over something he can't control, and then Gordon's doubling down by being even more of a douche than usual. So now, everyone's coming together. And this is a really heartwarming episode at the end. I love the scene when Gordon's at the works and the others are at the sheds talking about him. And they're just saying, like, man, like, I miss him. Like, I didn't realize how hard it is to do his job. It kind of puts you in his shoes, and maybe the reason why he's so impatient or so rude is because, you know, he has this difficult job to do. But yeah, an amazing episode. One of the best of this era, period. And then we go to kind of a bunch of lame duck episodes, and we're gonna have a bunch of them in a row. Thomas and the Birthday Picnic is C tier. This episode, I don't really get the point. There really isn't anything that happens here. It's just Thomas taking the Fat Controller and his mother and family around to places, and it doesn't work. It just feels aimless. I never understood the engines whistling Happy Birthday, because it sounds nothing like that. I don't know how that just was not edited well. I don't know what the deal is there. I mean, I'm sure there's a way they could have done it. I don't know how, but they didn't do it there. I don't know. It's a weird episode, too, because the Fat Controller puts all this pressure on Thomas to plan this, when this really should be his responsibility. But I digress. It's just a blah episode. Tuneful Toots, I'm going to put in the D tier. I'm not a huge fan of this episode. Not a lot happens in it. Everyone is just weirdly cruel to Rusty because he likes this horn. And look, it's weird for Rusty to be irresponsible, and that's out of character. But everyone else, all the other Narrow Gauge characters in this episode are just weirdly mean-spirited. They're just mad and angry. They just don't like Rusty. I don't know where this comes from, and it's not a great characterization, and spoiler alert, you're going to hear that a lot. Thomas at the Toy Workshop, if I can actually grab this episode, is going to go in C tier as well. It's an okay episode, but again, it's like nothing, it's not really any kind of story. It's like the story starts, it's like Thomas wants to do this job. Oh wait, you can't. Well, he wants to do this other job. Oh, wait, you can't. Oh, wait, actually, you get to do the second job you wanted to do. Actually, you get to do both jobs. Oh, wait, you can't do it because you weren't strong enough. It's like, this just, I don't know, that just isn't really a story. It's just kind of stuff happening to Thomas in a day. There really isn't a moral. It's just kind of all over the place. So it goes in C tier, nothing special. In the same way that Gordon Respect for Gordon is one of the more infamous episodes in the season for all the right reasons. Rheneas and the Dinosaur is infamous for all the wrong ones. This is just a bad episode. Rheneas is terribly out of character. Skarloey's out of character. I don't know what the writers were thinking with the Narragaage characters, but they really did not do a good job with most of them. And that's going to be a growing theme this season. I think the characters were handled poorly. I think Rheneas' character was handled poorly. I think this story is very, very annoying to watch, because these are some of the wisest engines on Sodor, and they're bickering like kids. And this is not the first time in this era this happens. Thomas and the New Engine, I'm going to put in D tier, and I have a lot of problems with this episode. This episode is very problematic. Look, calling all engines at this point happened about 10 episodes ago. Yeah. So the old diesel steam thing should have been put to bed, and for some reason it's back this season and it happens in a few episodes. Whatever. But the notion of how the characters really just treat Neville, it feels so mean-spirited and wrong. And again, I don't like the fact that Edward's involved. This whole episode is weird, and the problem is, it's like, once they realize, oh, we were wrong about Neville, no one addresses the fact that, like, it's kind of a problem the way they were talking about Diesels. Like, the fact that he could be friends with the Diesels is enough for him to be basically put on a hit list. And it's just a really poorly constructed episode. I've actually had ideas on how I would fix it. Maybe I'd do that in a video in the future, but this is just not a well-made episode. Moving on. We have Toby feels left out. This is an okay episode. I remember recently Lucky Tuck saying this is one he enjoyed. I'll put it in the B tier. I think it's a perfectly fine episode. It's nothing special. But this episode is just okay. It's I kind of like the story. I'm not a huge fan of these characters thinking they're going to be scrap stories, because I feel like we're kind of past that. It just feels wrong. But I think this is probably one of the better ones, because I can kind of see why Toby would believe this. Next we have Thomas Tries His Best. C tier. It's the same formula. This is almost identical to Thomas Gets It Right, except Thomas doesn't necessarily give in to his impulses. I think there's actually a subplot that got deleted from this episode, most likely for time, where Emily takes over Thomas's job, but then she's too rough, so then Thomas takes it back over and finishes. Maybe that would have helped the episode, but I'm just tired of seeing Thomas complain about getting the boring job, and then we have to sit along with him and deal with the boring job. They're not entertaining episodes. The Magic Lamp. It's interesting, the lore it introduces, but it's just okay. It's just okay. I'm not a huge fan of this episode, but, you know, I think I'm going to put it in C tier. I don't like Peter Sam's characterization. He's weirdly negative in this episode, and it's just not really his character. He's usually the optimist, the naive one. I feel like he would be leaving this, you know, hook, line, and sinker. Instead, he's just trying to be this pessimist about it. It just feels wrong for his character. Thomas the Statue, though, is one of the better episodes of the season, and I will put it in A tier. This episode, I think, is a really fun kind of Thomas going up against his friends episode. Thomas is bragging and boasting. It feels right to his character because he's kind of being cheeky, and I like that the other characters turn on him. But I do like the moment when, you know, it snows and the Fat Controller needs the tracks clear, and Thomas is like, "I'll do it," and everyone's like shocked because like they know Thomas hates clearing snow, but he does it anyway. And I think that's honestly a really nice thing that he does. So it's a really sweet episode. Also, it seems to me like the Steam Team episodes have been fairly strong, with, you know, Thomas and the birthday mail or birthday cake, whatever, birthday party. God, they all run the same. Being the exception. Henry and the Flagpole is one of the better average episodes of the season. It's not the best Henry story, but I do kind of like it. I did kind of enjoy watching this one. It was kind of fun. I like the moment when Henry talks to Trevor and says he's not a good flagpole. But, again, really good episode overall. Just not super special. Now we're going to get into a string of a few good episodes from this season. Emily Knows Best is a S-tier episode. It's another one this season I was excited to get to. I think everyone is near perfectly characterized here. Emily's a great character here, and she's in good character. Toby's amazing. Percy's really good. I love the off-screen crash, just how violent it was. Not really much else to say. We talked about this episode a lot. Thomas's day off. I kind of really enjoyed this episode. I like Dennis. I mean, we've had lazy engines in the show before, but Dennis is kind of a different... Like, he's just so blunt about it, and he just keeps putting Thomas through the ringer. And I love the fact where Dennis just gives up on his job, and he ends up having this crash, and he explains himself to Thomas, and Thomas has like the angriest expression looking back at Dennis, but Thomas still helps him anyway, and I like that. And I do kind of wish we saw more of Dennis, because I think there's more they could have done with his character. But yeah, solid overall episode. Thomas's new trucks is an episode I used to not love as much, because I just never liked the concept of engines having their own trucks. But this episode going in A tier is really because it's a good Thomas and James rivalry story. And while I think the idea of new trucks is a little dumb, I do think it's an episode, though, that has kind of, you know, it's shown itself to be pretty solid. I think there's some great moments. I like seeing Bill and Ben again. That was a nice little surprise to bring them back here. But yeah. Moving on. Duncan in the Old Mine is another episode I think is... It's definitely the best narrow gauge episode of this season. Really, it's a good Duncan and Rusty story. I like that they pair these two up. I think Duncan's pretty well characterized. So all in all, solid episode. I don't have a lot to say about the good episodes. A lot of them just do things right. Bold and Brave is just kind of a weird episode. Again, it's the Diesels and Steamies doing their thing again. I also think it's kind of... there's something I like about this episode, but it has nothing to do with this episode itself, and I'll get to what I like about it when I cover another episode of this season. But this episode will go in C tier. It is just okay. Nothing particularly special. I did like seeing Ben again, though. Scarlet the Brave goes in F tier. I'm not going to talk about this one. It's the worst episode of the season by far. I don't need to talk about this episode. Everyone knows what's wrong with it. Moving on. Saving Edward is such an interesting episode this season. It's an episode that I generally... I want to like it as much as I can, but I know it's got problems. I consider it almost a guilty pleasure, and I can see the story working, just not quite the way they did it. I think I'm going to put this in upper B tier. It was not a terrible episode. It just needed an extra polish or two. Thomas and the Golden Eagle is not one I really thought about, but when I watched the episode, I did kind of like it. I mean, it's Thomas kind of avoiding doing a boring job, but I will say I did like the angle of, like, Percy trying his hardest to help Thomas out, not get him into trouble. So it was a really nice friendship episode for the two of them, so I will put it in B tier, but it's just okay. Keeping Up with James. If you guys have watched my channel, you would know this is one of the few episodes of this era that I've actually remade. I think it's the only one I've remade, and it's because I really enjoy this one. I love Edward and James's dynamic in this episode. I love the music. The music of this episode always gets stuck in my head. I love the themes. But yeah, it's a really good James and Edward story overall. Now, when I talked about Bold and Brave, I mentioned there's an episode that I ended up watching, and this is the one I watched today as I record, that Bold and Brave kind of sets up. And it's the idea that, like, Diesel scaring Thomas is scaring other engines. And this is the episode where he kind of gets his comeuppance. And it's a solid overall story. It's very close to A tier, but I'm going to put it in B tier. I did like this episode. I love the atmosphere. It's actually a weirdly creepy episode, especially for this era. Especially with that opening shot. I always love the shot of Emily coming out, coming past the glowing shed and all that. It's such an eerie thing. I love the shot of the kid in the bedroom where he's got the Ernal Percy, but the thing that always stood out to me as a kid was the poster of Thomas, because I had that exact same poster in my room, and I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, really solid episode. I do like Thomas and Diesel's dynamic in this one a little bit better. It feels more personal. between both characters, but again, I'm still not a huge Diesel-Steam rivalry guy this year. It feels a little weird. So that is Season 9, and I'll be honest, I was a lot nicer to the season than I thought I was going to be going into it, but it was an overall solid season. I mean, there were some bad episodes in it, but there was a lot of really good ones, and I recommend checking out, especially the ones in the A tier, the S tier, especially if you haven't. B tier, I would say up to, like, right around here is where I would check out some of the stories. I don't know. It's interesting. I think some of the new characters like Molly and Dennis were handled pretty well, but others like Neville wasn't great. Mighty Mac was okay. And the thing is, Mighty Mac doesn't do anything like the rest of the season. I don't think he even speaks. Or I don't think they even speak, so it's whatever. So yeah. This is King James signing off. Content is coming soon, I promise. We will be busy yet again. I promise. Anyway, see you around, guys.